The humid Houston air hung thick and heavy as the sun bled a fiery orange across the downtown skyline, turning the glass towers into pillars of molten steel against a bruised purple evening. A breeze, carrying the earthy scent of the bayou and the faint perfume of magnolia blossoms, did little to cut the late autumn heat. It was the kind of evening that promised slow conversations on screened-in porches, the clink of ice in a glass of sweet tea. But for Clara Hayes, it was merely the backdrop for the most critical business meeting of her career. Clara paused her custom-built, ultralight titanium wheelchair at the base of the grand staircase leading up to the Spire restaurant, gathering her composure. At 26, she possessed a fierce resolve that often masked her vulnerability. Her unruly auburn hair was wrangled into a sleek, professional bun, and her hazel eyes, usually bright with creative energy, were now shadowed with focused anxiety. She smoothed the lapels of her navy blue blazer, checked her reflection in the dark glass of the entrance. She needed this contract. Her freelance graphic design business had been floundering since the car accident 2 years prior had stolen her ability to walk, and landing the branding deal for a major tech startup tonight was her lifeline. Taking a deep, steadying breath, she gripped the rims of her wheels and expertly propelled herself up the smooth, wide ramp. The Spire was a temple of new money, built to intimidate. It boasted floor-to-ceiling windows, crystal chandeliers that dripped like frozen waterfalls, and polished Italian marble floors that magnified every whisper, every footstep. As Clara passed through the heavy glass doors, a murmur of expensive chatter and the chime of silver on porcelain washed over her. She approached the hostess stand, offering a polite, hopeful smile to the maître d', a man with slicked back hair and a nose that seemed permanently wrinkled in disapproval. "Good evening," Clara said, her voice steady despite the knot in her stomach. "I have a 7 o'clock reservation under Hayes. I'm meeting Mr. Albright." The maître d' didn't glance at his book. Instead, his eyes traveled over the gleaming frame of her chair, down to her legs, and finally to her face, his expression solidifying into a mask of cool, bureaucratic indifference. "I'm afraid we're fully committed this evening, Miss Hayes," he drawled, his tone dripping with a syrupy politeness that was more insulting than a shout. "There must be some mistake. We can't accommodate a party with your spatial requirements in the main dining room tonight. It disrupts the flow of service for our other guests." Clara felt a hot flush creep up her cheeks, a mixture of shame and rising anger. "I made this reservation 2 weeks ago," she insisted, keeping her voice even. "And I specifically requested an accessible table. Mr. Albright is waiting. Please, check your list." The maître d' let out a heavy, theatrical sigh of impatience and tapped a pen against his lectern. "As I said, the floor plan was altered for a private event. A wheelchair simply doesn't fit the aesthetic we're cultivating tonight. Perhaps you'd be more comfortable ordering from the bar menu for takeout." Before Clara could respond to the blatant discrimination, a shadow fell over the hostess stand. A man in a charcoal gray Italian suit, tailored to fit his broad shoulders perfectly, strode into her periphery. This was Leland Vance, owner of the Spire and a real estate magnate as known for his ruthless evictions as for his inherited billion-dollar fortune. He was conventionally handsome, slick and polished, with impeccably styled blonde hair and a jawline that could cut glass. But his blue eyes held no warmth, only a predatory gleam. Vance glanced at the maître d', then down at Clara, a smirk playing on his lips. "Is there a problem here, Jeffrey?" Vance asked smoothly. "Or just a traffic jam in my lobby?" The maître d' stiffened, clearly terrified of his boss. "Mr. Vance, this young woman is insisting on a table, but I was explaining that her equipment is a hazard to the waitstaff." Vance let out a low, humorless chuckle that made Clara's skin crawl. "A hazard is one way of putting it," he said. He turned to face Clara fully, looking her up and down with undisguised contempt. "Listen, sweetheart, this is a place for winners, for the elite. This isn't some community clinic. You're blocking the entrance and frankly, you're upsetting the clientele. Why don't you roll along before you cause an accident?" Clara gripped her armrests, her knuckles white. The injustice of it burned in her throat like acid. "I have every right to be here, Mr. Vance," she said, her voice trembling slightly with suppressed rage. "My money is as good as anyone else's. I'm not leaving until I meet with my client." She tried to maneuver her chair around the hostess stand to enter the dining room herself. It was a bold move, born of desperation and self-respect. As she pushed forward, Vance moved with surprising speed. He stepped into her path, not to block her, but to arrest her momentum. With a subtle, calculated motion, he hooked the toe of his polished Oxford shoe under the front caster of her wheelchair and yanked, while simultaneously using his hip to shove her shoulder. It all happened in slow motion. The wheelchair's delicate balance shifted. "No!" Clara cried out as the world tilted. Her hand scrabbled for purchase, but it was too late. The chair tipped over, spilling her onto the hard, cold marble floor. She landed hard on her side, the impact knocking the wind out of her and forcing a sharp cry of pain. Her portfolio case slid across the floor, papers scattering like fallen leaves. A stunned silence fell over the restaurant, followed immediately by a rustle of shocked whispers. Yet no one moved. The wealthy patrons in their designer dresses and tailored suits stared as if she were a piece of performance art gone wrong. A few even pulled out their phones, camera lenses like unblinking eyes recording her humiliation. Clara lay there for a moment, dazed, pain radiating from her hip. She felt tears welling at the corners of her eyes, not from the physical hurt, but from the crushing weight of the indignity. Above her, Vance dusted off his suit jacket, looking down at her with a dismissive sneer. "I told you that you were a hazard," he announced loudly, playing to the room. "Clumsy. Someone call security to help this woman off my property before she tries to sue us for her own carelessness." Clara tried to push herself up on her elbows, her arms trembling. The marble was slick and her legs, unresponsive and heavy, were a dead weight. She felt small. She felt broken. She felt utterly alone in a room full of people. Then the atmosphere in the lobby changed. A low, deep vibration hummed through the space. A sound so primal and menacing it cut through the crowd's murmurs. From the open terrace doors, a dark shape shot inside. A massive German shepherd, its black and tan coat bristling, planted itself between Clara and Vance. This was Thor, a retired military working dog with intelligent eyes and a jagged scar running down his left flank, a souvenir from a tour in Afghanistan. Thor didn't bark. He simply lowered his head, peeled his lips back from a set of teeth that looked capable of snapping bone, and issued a rumbling growl that vibrated in Vance's chest. Vance took a step back, his arrogance instantly replaced by a primal fear. "Get that beast off of me!" he shrieked, his composure shattering. "Where is security?" Behind the dog stood a man who seemed to command space with a different kind of gravity than Vance. Mark Cal Callahan, in his early 30s, was dressed simply in dark jeans, heavy boots, and a plain gray t-shirt that stretched across a powerful frame forged by years of service as a Navy SEAL. He had short cropped dark hair and a face that was more rugged than handsome, marked by a quiet intensity. He didn't look at the crowd. He didn't look at the waiters. His eyes were locked on Vance, and they were cold enough to freeze the Gulf of Mexico. Cal walked past the trembling millionaire and knelt beside Clara. His presence was a calm anchor, smelling of open air and clean soap. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice low and gravelly, but gentle. Clara looked up into his dark eyes and saw no pity there, only a steady, reassuring empathy. "I think I'm okay," she whispered, her voice shaky. "Just my pride." Cal nodded. He didn't grab her or haul her up like a sack of potatoes. He offered his forearm, creating a solid point of leverage. "On three," he said softly. 1, 2, 3. With his help, she was able to pull herself back into the seat, which he had righted with one swift motion. He knelt again to gather her scattered papers, stacking them neatly and placing the portfolio back in her lap. He checked the casters of her chair, his hands moving with professional efficiency, making sure nothing was bent. Only then did Cal straighten up and turn to face Leland Vance. The millionaire had recovered a sliver of his bravado, realizing the dog wasn't attacking, and was trying to regain his bluster. "You're responsible for this animal," Vance snapped, pointing a trembling finger. "You're trespassing. Get out before I have you arrested for assault." Cal took one step forward. Thor moved with him, a fluid shadow at his heel. The crowd held its breath. Cal didn't shout. He didn't posture. He spoke in the quiet, terrifying tone of a man who had seen real violence and found Vance's version pathetic. "You tripped her," Cal stated flatly. "I saw you hook the wheel." Vance's face flushed a deep red. "It was an accident," he lied, his voice pitching higher. "She lost control." Cal tilted his head slightly, his eyes boring into Vance's soul. "You think because you wear a $5,000 suit, you can treat people like they're garbage?" Cal asked, his voice dangerously calm. "You think this floor, these lights, this money makes you a man?" Cal stepped closer, invading Vance's personal space until the millionaire flinched. Thor let out one last, sharp bark that made Vance jump. Cal leaned in, his voice dropping to a whisper that carried across the silent room. "Money can buy you this restaurant, Vance. It can buy you the suit and the car outside, but it can't buy you a spine, and it sure as hell can't buy you character. You're poor in the only way that matters." He turned his back on Vance, dismissing him as a threat. He looked at Clara, his expression softening. "I know a place down by the bayou. The food is better and the company is significantly less awful. May I escort you out? Clara looked at the man, then at the dog, who was now regarding her with a tilted head and a tentative wag of its tail. She looked back at Vance, who stood red-faced and impotent with rage. For the first time since the accident, she felt a spark of defiance. Yes, she said, a real smile touching her lips for the first time. I'd like that very much. The transition from the sterile, air-conditioned chill of the Spire to the warm, humid embrace of the Houston evening felt like stepping out of a tomb and back into the world of the living. Clara Hayes took a deep breath, letting the thick, earthy air fill her lungs, trying to will away the feeling of humiliation that still clung to her like a second skin. Beside her, Cal Callahan walked with a loose, easy gait, his hands in the pockets of his jeans, while Thor, the magnificent German shepherd, trotted between them as if he were a furry conduit of peace. They left the glittering high-rises of downtown behind, heading toward a quieter stretch of the Buffalo Bayou where the city met the slow-moving water. The silence between them wasn't empty. It was heavy with the unspoken weight of what had just happened. Yet, it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of quiet that exists between two people who have just weathered a storm together, however brief. I hope you're not expecting 5-star service where we're going, Cal said, breaking the silence. His voice was a low rumble that seemed to blend with the distant sound of traffic on the freeway. The ambience is mostly mosquitoes and diesel fumes, but the brisket is worth the risk. Clara managed a small, genuine smile, the first one that had reached her eyes in hours. At this point, she replied, her voice a little stronger now, I'll settle for anywhere that doesn't have a dress code or a judgment policy. They arrived at a gravel lot near the water's edge, where a brightly painted food truck sat illuminated by strings of Edison bulbs that swayed gently in the breeze. The sign on its roof read T-Bone's Barbecue Pit in peeling, rustic letters. A line of people waited at the window, but the moment Cal approached, the man inside the truck leaned out. He was a large man in his 50s with dark, leathery skin, arms covered in colorful tattoos of longhorns and bluebonnets, and a bright red bandana holding back his salt and pepper dreadlocks. He had a smile that could light up a ballpark. Cal. He boomed, his voice cracking with pleasure. Thought you were still eating MREs in some sandy pit overseas. When did you get back? A few days ago, T-Bone, Cal said, stepping to the window and clasping the older man's hand. Needed some real food before I forgot what it tasted like. T-Bone's gaze shifted to Clara, and his expression softened instantly, losing none of its warmth but gaining a layer of respectful gentleness. And who's this lovely lady? Finally bringing some class to the joint? This is Clara, Cal introduced. Clara, this is T-Bone. He claims to make the best brisket in Texas. I have yet to find evidence to the contrary. For you, beautiful lady, it's on the house, T-Bone said with a wink. 2 specials, coming right up. Go grab a seat. I'll bring it out. They found a weathered wooden picnic table near the edge of the lot overlooking the bayou, where the lights of the downtown skyline reflected on the dark water like a string of scattered jewels. Clara maneuvered her chair to the end of the table and Cal sat on the bench opposite her. Thor, who had been a picture of disciplined vigilance, did something unexpected. He circled Clara's chair twice, sniffed her hand, and then rested his heavy, blocky head on her knee, letting out a long, contented sigh. Clara froze for a second, then hesitantly reached out and scratched behind the dog's velvety ears. He likes you, Cal observed, opening 2 bottles of root beer T-Bone had set on the counter. That's rare. Thor's usually all business. To be honest, he's a better judge of character than I am. If he thinks you're good people, you're good people. He's beautiful, Clara whispered, watching the dog's eyes close in contentment. I've always been a little afraid of big dogs, especially after, well, everything, but he feels safe. He's retired, same as me. Well, semi-retired in my case, Cal corrected himself, taking a sip of his drink. I'm on leave. Just trying to remember how to be a civilian. Clara looked at him, really looked at him in the soft glow of the string lights. The hard lines of his face seemed softer here, by the water. Is it hard? She asked. Coming back. It's noisy, Cal admitted, gazing out at the water. Not sound, but clutter. People worrying about things that don't matter, like table arrangements and VIP lists. I come here for the quiet. The bayou doesn't care who you are. It just is. I guess I'm just looking for balance. He turned his gaze back to her. What about you, Clara? You handled that back there with a lot of grace. Most people would have fallen apart. Clara looked down at her hands, tracing the grain of the wood on the table. I fell apart on the inside, she confessed. 2 years ago, a drunk driver ran a red light. I lost the use of my legs. And for a long time, I thought I lost everything else, too. My career, my confidence. Tonight was supposed to be my comeback. That client, Mr. Albright, was a huge opportunity. She paused, then looked up, her jaw setting with a renewed determination that made her eyes flash. But I'm tired of being the victim. I'm a graphic designer. I create things. I build brands. That's who I am. Not just the girl in the wheelchair. Then show me, Cal said simply. He didn't offer platitudes or pity. He just asked for proof of her talent. Clara blinked, surprised, then pulled her phone from her blazer pocket. She opened her portfolio app and slid the phone across the table. Cal scrolled through her designs in silence. He looked at logos, digital art pieces, branding concepts. His face was serious, studying them with the same focused intensity he'd used to scan the restaurant for threats. This is incredible, he said finally, handing the phone back. You have an eye for structure. It's chaotic, but organized. I like it. Thank you, Clara said, feeling a warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the humid air. It was the warmth of being seen, not as a charity case, but as a professional. T-Bone arrived with 2 heaping trays of sliced brisket, the smell of smoked hickory, spice rub, and tangy sauce perfuming the air. They ate, and for the first time in a long time, Clara forgot about the chair, the stairs, and the lost contract. She laughed at Cal's stories about T-Bone's secret sauce and she shared her dream of opening her own studio one day. As the night wore on and the crowd at the food truck thinned, Cal glanced at his watch. I should get you home, he said. It's late, and after the scene Vance caused, I wouldn't be surprised if he's still stewing. My van's in the restaurant's parking garage, Clara said, her stomach tightening at the thought of returning to the Spire. I can get a rideshare. No way. Cal stood, whistling for Thor, who reluctantly lifted his head from Clara's lap. My truck is right here. I'll drive you to the garage, get your keys, and follow you to make sure you get home safe. Or, if you trust me, we can get your van tomorrow, and I can just take you home now. Clara hesitated for only a heartbeat. The thought of facing that restaurant staff again tonight was nauseating. I live in the Heights, she said. It's a bit of a drive. I've got a full tank of gas and a dog that needs a ride. Cal smiled. Let's go. Cal's truck was a black, lifted, and formidable-looking Ford F-150. He moved with practiced ease, lifting her chair into the bed and securing it before helping her into the passenger seat. He didn't make a big deal of it. He just did it, his movements fluid and strong. The drive to the Heights was quiet but comfortable. When they pulled up in front of her apartment complex, a modest but well-maintained building with a designated accessible parking spot out front, Cal parked but didn't kill the engine. Is that your van? He asked, his voice suddenly hard, stripped of the warmth it held at the food truck. Clara looked where he was pointing. Her modified minivan, equipped with hand controls and a ramp, was parked in its designated spot under the carport. But something was wrong. It was listing heavily to one side. Oh no, Clara gasped, fumbling for the door handle. Cal was out of the truck before she had her door open. He retrieved her chair, set it up, and helped her down. Together, they approached the vehicle. It wasn't just a flat tire. All 4 tires had been slashed, the rubber gaping open like ragged wounds. And down the side, right across the driver's door, a key had been dragged deep, peeling the paint back in a jagged, ugly line. Who would do this? Clara whispered, her hands flying to her mouth. I don't have any enemies. Cal squatted down beside the rear tire, examining the gash. He ran a finger near the cut, his eyes narrowed. This wasn't random vandalism, he said, his voice cold and sharp. These cuts are precise, and it happened tonight while you were out. He stood, scanning the dark parking lot, his seal instincts fully engaged. Thor was growling low in his throat, hackles raised as he sniffed the asphalt. Vance, Cal said, the name a curse. He knew you wouldn't be home. He wanted to make sure you knew he could get to you. Clara felt a chill that went deeper than the night air. But why? Just because I stood up to him? Because men like him are weak, Cal said, looking at her with a fierce protectiveness. And when weak men are humiliated, they lash out. He pulled out his phone. I'm calling the police to file a report, and then I'm going to make sure this place is secure. He looked at her, his expression softening, but his eyes burned with a promise of retribution. I told you back there, Clara, I'm looking for balance. And right now, the scales are tipped. I'm not letting him get away with this. The morning sun that filtered through the blinds of Clara's apartment in the Heights should have heralded a new beginning, but instead, it illuminated a slow-motion disaster unfolding on her computer screen. Clara sat at her desk, her hands trembling as she clicked through a series of emails that had arrived in the dead of night. The first was from Mr. Albright, the client she was meant to meet at the Spire. His message was brief, professional, and brutally final, stating that his company had decided to go in a different direction for their branding needs and would no longer require her services. It was a blow, but it was the emails that followed that made her stomach clench into a frozen knot. 3 other pending contracts, projects she had been cultivating for months with local businesses, were suddenly cancelled within the span of an hour. The reasons given were vague: budget cuts, restructuring, a sudden change in marketing strategy, but the timing was no coincidence. It was a coordinated attack. Leland Vance wasn't just a man with a bruised ego, he was a kingmaker in the Houston business community, a man who sat on boards, funded campaigns, and held the purse strings for half the city's development projects. He was making good on his silent threat, systematically dismantling her livelihood with a few phone calls from his ivory tower. A heavy knock on her door made Clara jump. She rolled into the living room, her heart hammering against her ribs. When she opened it, she found Mr. Peterson, the building manager, standing in the hallway. He was a balding man in his late 50s with a nervous disposition and a perpetually damp upper lip, normally kind but easily flustered. Today, he wouldn't meet her eyes. "Morning, Ms. Hayes," he mumbled, clutching a thick envelope. I was asked to hand-deliver this. Urgent notice." Clara took the envelope, her fingers numb. "What is this, Mr. Peterson?" she asked, though a cold dread was already creeping through her. "Change in building ownership," he said, shifting his weight from foot to foot. "The complex was acquired this morning by a holding company called Vance Realty Group. They're making immediate market rate adjustments." Clara tore open the envelope. The legalese was dense, but the numbers jumped out at her like a slap in the face. Her rent was being increased by 300%, effective the 1st of next month. It was an eviction notice in all but name. There was no way a freelance designer, especially one who had just lost all her clients, could afford that. "I'm sorry, Clara," Mr. Peterson whispered, finally looking at her with genuine pity. "I tried to tell them you're a perfect tenant, but the new owners, they were very specific about the new rates." When Cal arrived an hour later, ostensibly to give her an update on the police report regarding her van, he found Clara sitting in the middle of her living room, staring at the wall. The apartment was dark, the blinds drawn against the cheerful Texas sun. Thor entered first, his claws clicking on the wood floor, and immediately sensed the distress. He whined low in his throat and nudged his wet nose into Clara's hand. Cal followed, his frame filling the doorway, a file folder in his hand. He took in the scene at once: the unopened letters on the floor, the red-rimmed eyes, the stillness that spoke more of defeat than peace. He didn't ask, "Are you okay?" The answer was obvious. Instead, he quietly shut the door behind him and knelt beside her chair, bringing himself to her eye level. "Report," he said softly, his tone gentle but demanding focus. "What happened?" Clara handed him the rent increase notice without a word. Then she pointed to her laptop. "He bought my building, Cal. He bought the whole building just to kick me out. And he killed my contracts. All of them. I'm toxic now. No one in this city will hire me if they want to stay on Vance's good side." Cal read the letter, his jaw tightening until a muscle jumped near his ear. He placed the paper on the coffee table with a slow, deliberate control, banking his anger rather than letting it explode. "This is a siege," he murmured. "He's cutting off your supply lines." He looked at Clara, at the way she was slumped in her chair, the fight drained out of her. "Have you eaten?" She shook her head. "I'm not hungry." "That's irrelevant," Cal said, standing. "You need fuel." He walked into her kitchen and opened her fridge. It was sparse, but he found eggs, spinach, and some cheese. He didn't ask permission. He just started moving. He washed his hands and began to cook, the rhythmic sounds of chopping and sizzling filling the silent apartment. While the food was cooking, Cal returned to the living room. He'd noticed something earlier, a subtle wobble in the left wheel of her chair when she'd turned. "Your chair took a hit yesterday when you fell," he observed. "The camber is off." Without waiting for a reply, he went out to his truck and returned with a small canvas tool roll. Clara watched him in silence. Most people, faced with her tragedy, offered clichés. They said, "It will be okay." Or, "Everything happens for a reason," words that felt like ash in her mouth. Cal offered no words. He offered competence. He tipped up her spare manual chair, she'd transferred to the sofa at his instruction, and went to work on the alignment. He tightened bolts, adjusted the tension of the spokes, and lubricated the bearings. His hands, scarred and calloused, moved with the precision of a surgeon. He treated her mobility device not as a piece of medical equipment, but as a critical piece of gear that needed to be mission-ready. The sight of him fixing her chair, caring for the very thing that gave her freedom, moved her more than any bouquet of flowers ever could. "Chow's ready," he announced, wiping his hands on a rag. He served 2 plates of omelets with sautéed spinach and toast. It was a simple, no-nonsense meal, but to Clara, it tasted like salvation. They ate at her small dining table, Thor lying obediently under the table at Clara's feet. "Why are you doing this?" Clara asked quietly, pushing a piece of egg around her plate. "You barely know me. This is a lot to take on for a second date that wasn't even a date." Cal paused, his fork halfway to his mouth. He looked at her, his dark eyes intense and unblinking. "I don't like bullies," he said simply. "And I don't like waste. Vance is wasting his power trying to crush someone because his ego is too fragile to take a hit. And you?" He gestured to her, then to the computer. "You were ready to give up. I could see it. You were thinking about packing it in, heading back wherever you came from, seeding the ground." Clara looked down. "I can't fight a billionaire, Cal. I have $300 in my bank account and a van with slashed tires." "You can't fight him alone," Cal corrected. "In the teams, we have a saying. Never swim alone. The buddy system isn't just a rule. It's survival." After the meal, Cal insisted on cleaning up. Clara rolled over to the sink to help, refusing to be completely passive. "I can wash," she said stubbornly. "You dry." They stood and sat side by side at the small kitchen sink. Warm water ran over Clara's hands as she scrubbed the plates, passing them to Cal. The domesticity of the moment was a stark contrast to the chaos of her life. It felt solid. As she handed him a wet plate, her soapy fingers brushed against his. It was a fleeting, wet, slippery contact, but it sent a jolt through her. They both froze. The water was still running, a steady drumbeat in the quiet room. Cal didn't pull his hand away. He let it linger near hers for a fraction of a second too long. The air between them grew heavy, charged with something that was both terrifying and exhilarating. Clara looked up at him, her eyes searching his face for a reason to run, but finding only a steady harbor. "I'm a mess, Cal," she whispered, her voice cracking. "My life is falling apart. I'm in a wheelchair. I'm broke. I'm being hunted by a man who owns this city. Why are you still here?" Cal turned off the faucet. The sudden silence was deafening. He took the plate from her, set it on the counter, and then turned to face her fully. He reached out and took her wet, soapy hand in his own rough, dry one. He didn't grip it. He held it, as if it were something precious. "Because you're still fighting," he said, his voice low and raspy with emotion. "You're terrified, but you're still here. You didn't beg for pity when he tripped you. You demanded your dignity." He gave her hand a gentle squeeze. "I don't leave a teammate behind, Clara. And as of right now, you're my teammate. We are going to fix the van. We are going to find a loophole in that lease, and we are going to make Leland Vance regret the day he decided to pick a fight with us." Clara looked at their joined hands, his large and scarred and capable, her smaller and trembling, but held fast. A single tear tracked its way down her cheek. But for the first time in 24 hours, it wasn't a tear of despair. It was relief. "Okay," she whispered, squeezing his hand back. "Okay, teammate." The word hung in the air. A pact sealed not with a contract, but with soap suds and a promise. Cal wiped the tear from her cheek with his thumb, his touch lingering for a heartbeat that felt like an eternity. "Okay," he repeated softly. "Now let's finish these dishes. We have a war to plan tomorrow." For the next 3 days, Cal Callahan vanished into a state of being few civilians ever witness, a state of hyper-focused calm known in the SEAL teams as going dark. He didn't storm Leland Vance's office. He didn't throw bricks through windows. Instead, he became a ghost in his own city. He swapped his truck for a nondescript rental sedan and his boots for silent-soled running shoes. While Clara worked to salvage her portfolio from the safety of her apartment, which Cal had secured with new locks and a motion sensor camera system, Cal began to dismantle his enemy, not with force, but with information. He spent hours in the public library, poring over city planning permits, zoning requests, and the public tax records of Vance's sprawling empire. He was building a battle map, connecting shell corporations to contractors and contractors to specific job sites. He treated taking down this real estate tycoon exactly like he'd treat a mission to dismantle a terrorist cell, identify the network, find the weak link, and exploit it. But paperwork was only half the battle. To really understand the enemy, he needed eyes and ears on the ground. On Wednesday afternoon, to break the tension of the surveillance, Cal drove Clara out to a remote facility in the scrubland east of the city. It was a K-9 training center, a dusty, sprawling complex of obstacle courses and bite work arenas where military and police dogs were forged. "I wanted you to see where Thor comes from," Cal told her as he lifted her chair from the truck. "It helps to understand why he is the way he is." They were met by Deb Johnson, the owner of the facility. Deb was a formidable woman in her late 50s with sun-cured skin, a short crop of iron gray hair, and a handshake that could crush a pecan. She walked with a slight limp, a souvenir from her days as a handler in the Border Patrol's K-9 unit. "So this is the civilian who stole my star pupil's heart," Deb said loudly, ignoring Cal to shake Clara's hand warmly. "And I'm talking about the dog, not the frogman." Clara laughed, a sound that was clear and genuine. "It's good to meet you, Deb. Thor has been. Well, he's been my shadow." Deb nodded, tossing a heavy jute bite sleeve to Cal. "That's what they do, honey. They pick a mission. Looks like you're the mission now. Go suit up, Callahan. Show the lady what the boys can do." For the next hour, Clara watched in mesmerized silence as Cal and Thor moved through the obstacle course. It was a dance of pure kinetic energy and absolute discipline. On the field, Cal wasn't just the quiet man who had cooked her eggs. He was a conductor of violence and control. He'd give a silent hand signal and Thor would launch himself over a 6-foot wall. Another, and the dog would freeze mid-stride, dropping to the ground like a stone. When Cal put on the bite suit, Thor transformed into a missile of fur and muscle, hitting the padded arm with terrifying force, yet releasing the instant Cal whispered the command. It was frightening, yes, but it was also beautiful. It was a partnership built on a depth of trust Clara had never witnessed before. Afterward, as they sat on the tailgate of the truck drinking water, Clara looked at Cal with a new light in her eyes. "The way he listens to you," she said softly, stroking Thor's panting coat. "It's like you share a brain. I used to think discipline was about restriction. But watching you, it's like freedom. You're free to move because you have absolute trust in each other." Cal looked at her, wiping the sweat from his brow. "That's it exactly," he said, meeting her gaze. "Discipline equals freedom. And trust. Trust is the only currency that matters. Vance thinks the currency is money. That's why he's going to lose." In that moment, surrounded by dust and dying sunlight, Cal found a peace he hadn't felt in years. Clara's resilience, her ability to see the beauty in the harsh reality of his world, was grounding him. She wasn't just a damsel he was rescuing. She was becoming his anchor. The investigation intensified on Thursday night. Cal had identified a flagship project of the Vance Corporation, Patriots Point. It was billed as a charitable housing initiative for low-income families and veterans, a project that had earned Vance numerous civic awards and tax breaks. It was currently under construction in a remote industrial part of the city. Cal decided to take Thor for a walk along the perimeter of the site long after the construction crews had gone home. The site was surrounded by a chain-link fence and no trespassing signs, but security was lax, relying mostly on public indifference. Cal wore a hoodie and kept to the shadows, moving with the silent grace of a predator. Thor was on a long lead, his nose working the air, processing 1,000 cents a second. They were walking along the back perimeter, where the site bordered a drainage canal. The skeletons of the apartment buildings loomed against the night sky, looking more like cages than homes. As they passed a large pile of construction debris and stacked materials near a rear gate, Thor's demeanor changed abruptly. He stopped panting. His hackles, the fur along his spine, rose in a jagged ridge. He didn't bark, but he let out a sharp, percussive huff, the sound he made when he detected something dangerous. He pulled hard against the fence, whining with a fierce urgency. "What is it, buddy?" Cal whispered, dropping to a crouch. Thor was focused on a pallet of insulation and several drums of sealant stacked haphazardly under a tarp. The wind shifted, and Cal smelled it too, a sharp, acrid chemical odor, distinct from the usual construction smells of dust and pine. It smelled like sickness. Trusting his dog's nose, Cal checked for cameras, found a blind spot, and snipped a small hole in the chain link with a pair of wire cutters. He slipped through, signaling for Thor to stand guard. He approached the pile of materials. The manifest attached to the pallet claimed the insulation was Grade A, eco-friendly, a high-end fire retardant required by California law for multifamily dwellings. But when Cal pulled back the tarp and examined the packaging, he saw the truth. The outer boxes were correctly branded, but they had been opened and retaped. Inside, the actual rolls of insulation were unbranded, crumbly, and smelled of formaldehyde and cheap petroleum chemicals. He moved to the drums of sealant. They were labeled as premium waterproofing, but the expiration dates had been ground off, and the liquid leaking from one rusty rim was the wrong color and viscosity. Cal pulled out his phone and started taking high-resolution photos. He photographed the fake labels, the crumbling material, and the leaking drums. Then he found something even more damning. In a nearby dumpster, buried under fast food wrappers, was a discarded clipboard. Cal retrieved it and illuminated it with the red-lensed beam of his tactical flashlight. It was a shipping invoice from a company called Titan Imports, based in a country notorious for producing banned, carcinogenic building materials. The cost listed on the import bill was a fraction of what Vance was charging the city and the Veterans Housing Fund for the premium materials. The truth hit Cal with the force of a physical blow. This wasn't just cutting corners. This was a death trap. Vance was building homes for veterans, for men and women who had served their country, using toxic, highly flammable materials that would turn those apartments into gas chambers in the event of a fire. He was poisoning the very people he claimed to be helping, all to skim millions of dollars to fund his lifestyle of marble floors and Italian suits. This was money laundering on a massive scale, washing the dirty savings from illegal imports through the clean grant money of the housing project. Cal felt a cold, white-hot rage rise in his chest. He wanted to burn the place to the ground. He wanted to drive to Vance's mansion and drag him out by his expensive hair. But he held himself in check. He looked at Thor, who was watching the perimeter, steady and calm. Discipline equals freedom. If he acted now, he'd just be a vandal. If he waited, if he built the case, he could bury Vance for good. He slipped back through the fence, repairing the wire as best he could to leave no trace. He made his way back to the truck he'd parked a mile away. When he got back to Claire's apartment, she was waiting up for him, working on a sketch at her kitchen table. She looked up, saw the darkness in his face. "What did you find?" she asked, her voice laced with worry. Cal sat down opposite her, placing his phone and the stolen invoice on the table. "I found the smoking gun," he said, his voice dead flat. "Now we just have to wait for him to pull the trigger." He reached across and took her hand. "He's hurting people, Clara. Soldiers, families. He's building them coffins and calling them homes. I'm going to stop him. But not tonight. Tonight, we let him think he's safe." The invitation arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, delivered not by mail but by a uniformed private courier who required a signature with all the solemnity of serving a subpoena. The envelope was thick, black, textured cardstock with shimmering gold calligraphy that glittered under the harsh fluorescent light of Clara's kitchen. Inside, the invitation to the Heart of Houston Charity Gala was thick enough to be used as a weapon. It was the social event of the season, held at the historic Grand Texan Hotel with tickets that cost more than Clara's van was worth. Tucked inside the formal invitation was a handwritten note on personal letterhead. The script was jagged and aggressive. "Ms. Hayes, in the spirit of community and forgiveness, I would be honored if you would join us. Let's show the city there are no hard feelings. I've reserved a special place for you. Leland Vance." Clara dropped the card on the table as if it were coated in poison. "He's mocking me," she said, her voice tight with humiliation. "He wants me there so he can point to the poor, crippled girl and show everyone how magnanimous he is for forgiving the woman who caused a scene at his restaurant. He wants to parade me around as a charity case." Cal picked up the card, reading the note with a stoic expression. He was leaning against the kitchen counter, looking out the window where the afternoon sun was beginning to fade. "He's setting a trap," Cal agreed, his voice calm. "He thinks either you'll be too afraid to show up, which proves he won, or you'll show up, defeated, and apologize, which also proves he won." Cal turned to face her, his eyes dark and serious. "But he made a tactical error. He's assuming you're the same person he pushed over in that lobby." Clara looked up, confused. "I am that person, Cal. I'm still broke. I still can't walk, and he still owns half the city." "No," Cal corrected her gently. "Last time you were alone. This time you have backup, and you have the truth." He tapped the invitation against his palm. "We're going. But we're not going to apologize. We're going to accept his hospitality, eat his food, and let him think he's safe right before we burn his kingdom to the ground." Clara hesitated, looking at her wheelchair, then at the invitation. "I have nothing to wear to a place like that. My old life. Those dresses don't work when you're sitting down. They bunch up. They don't look right." "So we fix it," Cal said. "You're a designer, aren't you? Design something." He was right. If she was going to walk, roll, into the lion's den, she was going to do it in armor of her own making. Clara called in a favor from Brenda, an old friend from design school who ran a small boutique in the Galleria area. Brenda was a whirlwind of energy, a tiny woman with neon pink hair and a pincushion permanently strapped to her wrist like a watch. When Clara explained the situation, Brenda didn't ask questions. She just started pulling down bolts of fabric. For the next 48 hours, Clara's apartment became a war room of silk and satin. Clara sketched and Brenda sewed. They took a vintage emerald green silk gown and deconstructed it completely. Clara designed a silhouette that didn't just accommodate the wheelchair, but incorporated it. The skirt was full and layered, designed to cascade elegantly over the side guards of the chair, almost completely concealing the wheels, making it look as though Clara were floating on a green silk cloud. The bodice was tailored and structured, accentuating her posture with a neckline that framed her face and drew the eye upward. It wasn't a dress for a victim. It was a dress for a queen. The night of the gala arrived on a cool southern breeze. Cal had left early to prepare, promising to pick her up at 7 sharp. When the knock came, Clara took a deep, steadying breath. She had spent 2 hours on her hair and makeup, sweeping her auburn hair to one side in soft waves and applying a shade of bold red lipstick that felt like war paint. She rolled to the door and opened it. For a moment, she forgot to breathe. Cal Callahan stood in the hallway, but it was not the man in the t-shirt and jeans she had come to know. He was wearing his navy dress blues. The midnight blue uniform was impeccably tailored, accentuating the breadth of his shoulders and the narrowness of his waist. Gold buttons gleamed under the hallway light. On his left breast, a rainbow of ribbons told a story of campaigns fought in the shadows, topped by the heavy gold trident of the Navy SEALs, the Budweiser, as they called it, an elite symbol that commanded instant respect. He held a formal cover, its white fabric stark against the dark material, and his shoes were shined to a mirror finish. He looked impossibly handsome, but more than that, he looked formidable. He looked like a man who could command armies with a whisper. Cal stared at her, and for the first time, his composure broke. His eyes widened, taking in the emerald dress and the way the light caught her hair. He removed his cover, tucking it under his arm. "You look." He struggled for the word, then settled on the truth. "Dangerous. You look absolutely dangerous." Clara laughed, the tension in her chest loosening. "Is that a compliment, sailor?" "The highest one I've got." He smiled, offering his arm. "Your chariot awaits, ma'am." He escorted her down to the truck, which he had washed and polished until it looked respectable enough for a black tie event. The Grand Texan Hotel was ablaze with light, its grand portico a beacon of wealth. A line of limousines snaked up the driveway, depositing Houston's elite onto a red carpet flanked by photographers and journalists. When Cal's truck pulled up, the valet, a young man in a red vest, looked uncertain for a moment, but one glance at Cal in his full dress uniform made the kid stand up straighter and hurry to open the door. Cal retrieved Clara's chair from the truck bed, setting it down with practiced ease, and helped her transfer. He adjusted the train of her dress so it fell perfectly around the wheels. "Head up," Cal murmured as he took his place beside her. "Eyes forward. You belong here more than any of them." They moved toward the entrance. The moment they hit the red carpet, the atmosphere changed. The photographers, who had been lazily snapping pictures of socialites, suddenly snapped to attention. The sight was arresting. A decorated Navy SEAL officer, his face set in a grim, handsome line, next to a woman who looked like a classic Hollywood starlet, her emerald dress shimmering against the red carpet, her movements fluid and regal. The flashes began to pop, a symphony of blinding light. "Who is that? Is that the SEAL who just got back? Look at her dress." The whispers rippled through the lines. Clara felt a tremor in her hands, but she looked at Cal. He offered her his arm, not to push her, she was moving under her own power, but to rest his hand lightly on her shoulder, a gesture of solidarity and possession. Inside the grand ballroom, the Heart of Houston Gala was in full swing. A jazz band played softly, and waiters circulated with champagne. At the center of the room, standing under a massive crystal chandelier, was Leland Vance. He was holding court, surrounded by city council members and potential investors, laughing loudly at his own jokes. He looked every bit the master of his universe, confident that his little game with Clara had left her cowed and broken. He was in the middle of a story about his philanthropy when the chatter near the entrance suddenly died. The silence spread like a wave, rippling across the room until even the band faltered for a beat. Vance frowned, annoyed at the interruption to his spotlight. He turned to see what had captured everyone's attention. There, framed in the archway of the ballroom, were Cal and Clara. They were a vision of power and grace. The emerald of her dress and the midnight blue of his uniform were a stunning contrast to the sea of conventional black tuxedos. Clara sat tall, her chin high, her eyes scanning the room with a cool confidence that betrayed none of her earlier fear. She didn't look like the clumsy woman who had fallen in the lobby. She looked like royalty holding an audience. And beside her, Cal was a sentinel, the gold trident on his chest catching the light, sending a clear message to everyone in the room: she is protected. Vance's smile froze on his face. The champagne flute in his hand tilted dangerously. He had been expecting a broken woman in a frumpy dress hiding in a corner. Instead, he had been upstaged at his own party by the very victim he had tried to destroy. The guests began to murmur, pointing not with derision, but with awe. For the first time all night, Leland Vance felt small, and the realization burned hotter than any fire. "Shall we?" Cal asked, his voice low. "Let's go say hello to our host." Clara smiled, a sharp, dangerous curve of her red lips. "Lead the way, Commander." The grand ballroom of the Grand Texan Hotel hummed with the kind of hushed anticipation usually reserved for a coronation. The crystal chandeliers cast a warm, flattering glow on Houston's assembled power brokers, but the air was thick with an undercurrent of tension that radiated from the center of the room. Leland Vance stood on a raised stage, gripping the lectern as if it were the helm of a ship he was steering through a storm. He had recovered from the initial shock of Cal and Clara's arrival, or at least his narcissism had kicked in its emergency backup systems to mask the fear. He tapped the microphone, the feedback squeal silencing the remaining whispers. He straightened his silk tie, his blue eyes sweeping the crowd before landing with predatory weight on Clara, who was seated near the front, her emerald dress pooled around her like a shield. Vance smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. It was the baring of teeth before a bite. "Ladies and gentlemen," Vance began, his voice practiced and smooth, exuding a false warmth that made Cal's jaw clench. "Tonight is about compassion. It's about reaching down to lift up those who have fallen. It's about recognizing that some among us have been dealt a cruel hand by fate." He paused for dramatic effect, gesturing openly toward Clara with an open palm that felt more like an accusation than an invitation. "We are so honored to have Ms. Clara Hayes with us tonight. A tragic example of how quickly life can change. Confined to a wheelchair, unable to move through the world as we do, struggling to find her place. It is for people like her, broken, needy, dependent on the kindness of their betters, that we created the Heart of Houston Fund. We bring hope to the hopeless." The room grew uncomfortably silent. The insult was wrapped in charity, but it was unmistakably a slap in the face. Vance was stripping Clara of her agency, painting her as a pitiable object to be saved by his magnanimity. Clara felt her neck grow hot, but she didn't look down. She looked at Cal. He gave a nearly imperceptible nod, his face a mask of stone. "Now," Cal whispered, his voice low and steady. "We take the high ground." Clara pushed her chair forward. She didn't move with hesitation. She moved with purpose, her wheels gliding silently over the carpet. Cal walked beside her, his dress shoes tapping a steady rhythm. Thor patted at his heel with the disciplined gait of a wolf on patrol. They approached the steps to the stage. Vance watched, confused. He had expected her to cry or leave. He had not expected her to come to him. "Ms. Hayes," Vance said into the microphone, a slight tremor in his voice. "I didn't realize you wanted to express your gratitude personally." Cal effortlessly lifted the lightweight chair up the 3 steps to the stage, setting Clara down gently beside the lectern. Then he stepped back, clasping his hands behind him in a parade rest, a looming shadow of a sentinel. Clara locked the brakes on her chair. She looked out at the sea of faces, the people who had watched her fall in the restaurant, the ones who had ignored her emails. She reached out and adjusted the microphone, pulling it down to her level. "Thank you, Mr. Vance," she said, her voice clear and carrying through the hall without a tremor. "But I think there's been a misunderstanding. I'm not here for your charity, and I am certainly not broken. I'm here because I believe the truth is the only thing that truly cleanses a community." She turned her head slightly to look up at Vance, who was now sweating under the stage lights. "And the truth, Leland, is that you don't build homes. You build tombs." Vance laughed nervously, reaching for the microphone. "I think the emotion of the evening has gotten to our guest. Security, perhaps we should." "Kevin," Cal said sharply, his voice cutting across Vance's blustering. He wasn't talking to the billionaire. He was talking to the young AV tech at the control board at the back of the room. Kevin, a 20-something with messy hair and oversized headphones, whom Cal had accidentally bumped into and charmed earlier in the evening with stories about military communications tech, froze. "Execute Protocol Alpha," Cal commanded. It was a bluff, a meaningless phrase, but delivered with the authority of a Navy SEAL, it scared the kid into compliance. Kevin hit enter on the laptop that Cal had plugged a flash drive into earlier under the guise of checking the sound system. The giant projection screen behind Vance, which had been displaying the golden logo of the fund, flickered and went black. A collective gasp went through the crowd as a new image appeared. It was high resolution, crystal clear, and undeniable. It was a photo of the crumbling, chemical-laced insulation inside the walls of the Patriots Point project. Then came the invoices, the falsified documents from Titan Imports next to the real ones highlighting the massive price discrepancy, the chemical analysis report of the flammable sealant. Photos of eco-safe labels pasted over warnings that read carcinogenic hazard. "What is this?" Vance yelled, spinning to face the screen. "Turn that off. Somebody cut the power." "Those are the walls of the Veterans Housing Project you're building." Cal's voice boomed, needing no microphone, filling the hall with the force of rolling thunder. "You're using banned, toxic materials to skim 40 cents on every dollar. You're pocketing millions in city grant money while building gas chambers for the men and women who serve this country." The crowd erupted. Phones were held high, recording everything. The board members in the front row looked pale, whispering frantically among themselves. Vance looked like a cornered animal. His eyes darted around the room, looking for an exit, looking for a way to spin this. Then his eyes flickered to a door on the right side of the stage, the private green room, where he kept his personal effects during speeches. It was a micro-expression of panic that a trained interrogator like Cal caught instantly. "You're looking at the green room, Leland," Cal said calmly, stepping closer. "Is that where the real ledgers are? The ones on the encrypted drive you took from your safe this morning because you got my anonymous tip?" This was the trap. Early that morning, Cal had sent a vague, encrypted message to Vance's private server, hinting that the police were coming for his records. Panicked, Vance had moved the physical drive to his person or his temporary safe at the event to keep it close. "You set me up," Vance shrieked, his face turning a blotchy purple, the veneer of the sophisticated billionaire cracking to reveal the thug underneath. He looked at the crowd, saw his reputation in ashes. He looked at Cal, who was an immovable object, and then he looked at Clara, the woman in the wheelchair, the one he had assumed was weak. In a final, irrational spasm of violence, he lunged. "You ruined everything, you," he roared, raising a heavy fist to strike her. The blow never landed. Before Vance could take 2 steps, a blur of black and tan intercepted him. Thor, who had been sitting as still as a statue, exploded into action. He didn't bark. He didn't bite. He launched himself like a rocket, his 80 pounds of pure muscle slamming into the center of Vance's chest. The impact lifted the billionaire off his feet. Vance hit the stage floor with a sickening thud, the wind knocked out of him. Instantly, Thor was on him, his front paws pinning Vance's shoulders to the wood, his muzzle inches from Vance's throat. A low, deep, and terrifying growl rumbled through the microphone, amplifying the sound of the beast. Vance froze, too terrified to breathe, staring into the primal eyes of the war dog. "Thor, hold," Cal commanded softly. The dog didn't move a muscle, keeping the man pinned with absolute control. Cal walked over, ignored the fallen magnate, and stood beside Clara again. He looked out at the stunned crowd, then at the news crews who were now broadcasting live. "There is no honor in preying on the weak," Cal said into the silence. "Mr. Vance just demonstrated that money doesn't make you strong. It just makes you a target." The sound of sirens began to wail in the distance, growing louder as they approached the hotel entrance. Clara looked down at Vance, who was whimpering in fear under the dog. She didn't feel triumph. She didn't feel joy. She just felt the vast, heavy relief of a burden lifted. She looked at Cal, her protector, her teammate. "We did it," she whispered. Cal put a hand on her shoulder, his touch warm and steady. "Mission complete," he replied. The immediate aftermath of the gala was a chaotic symphony of flashing blue lights and the crackle of police radios, a stark contrast to the polite jazz that had filled the room only an hour before. The Houston Police Department had arrived first, responding to the assault call, but they were quickly joined by federal agents, summoned by the irrefutable evidence Cal had unleashed on the digital world. The transition from a high society event to a crime scene was swift and brutal for Leland Vance. He was hauled off the stage not as a captain of industry, but as a suspect, his hands cuffed behind his back, his expensive tuxedo rumpled and soiled from where Thor had pinned him. Leading the charge was Agent Miller, an FBI investigator with the weary look of a man who'd been chasing white-collar criminals for 2 decades in a suit that looked like it had been slept in. He was a stark contrast to the polished crowd with his graying hair and eyes that missed nothing. "Ms. Hayes, Mr. Callahan," Miller said, approaching them as medics checked Vance for injuries, of which there were none, save a shattered ego. "We've seized the hard drive from the green room. Preliminary scans confirm everything you displayed on that screen and then some. Extortion, fraud, endangerment. He's going away for a very long time." Clara watched from her chair as Vance was let out through a side door, screaming threats that no one was listening to anymore. The spell he had cast over the city was broken. For the first time in years, Clara felt the weight on her chest, the suffocation of injustice, dissipate. Her phone, which had been silent for days, began to light up incessantly. Emails from the clients who had dropped her, voicemails from design firms who had shunned her, and texts from community leaders apologizing for their silence. She didn't answer them yet. She just watched the screen glow, a confirmation that her name was no longer poison. It was vindication, sweet and absolute. But amidst the noise and the victory, she felt a different kind of heaviness settling in. She looked at Cal, who was standing quietly by the wall, scratching Thor behind the ears. He wasn't celebrating. He was watching the clock. The mission was complete, which meant his time here was running out. 3 days later, the chaos of the investigation had begun to settle into the low hum of legal proceedings. The news cycle was dominated by the Vance scandal, with Clara being hailed as a whistleblower and a community hero. But Clara and Cal were far from the cameras. They were on Galveston Beach, at the edge of the continent, watching the sun begin its slow descent into the Gulf. The sky was a bruised purple and gold, casting long shadows across the sand. The boardwalk was relatively empty, the summer tourists gone home, leaving the ocean to the locals. Cal walked beside her, hands in his pockets, his pace slow and deliberate. Thor was off-leash, chasing gulls near the water's edge, barking happily at the waves that lapped at his paws. It was a perfect evening, the kind of Texas dream people write songs about, but the air between Cal and Clara was thick with the unspoken reality of tomorrow. "So," Clara said, her voice soft, trying to be heard over the surf. "Oh, 6:00 hours. That's the time." Cal nodded, his eyes still on the horizon. "Wheels up at 08:00. Muster at 06:00. He stopped walking and turned to lean against the railing that separated the paved walk from the dunes. "My gear's packed. Thor goes to Deb's in the morning. She'll look after him until, well, for the duration." The word duration hung in the air, vague and ominous. Deployments could be 6 months. They could be longer. In the world of special operations, nothing was guaranteed. Not even a return ticket. Clara rolled her chair to face him, locking her brakes. She looked at his silhouette, memorizing the hard line of his jaw, the way his dark hair caught the dying light. "I'll miss him," she said, looking at the dog. Then she corrected herself, her voice catching. "I'll miss you, Cal." Cal turned to her, the stoic mask he wore so well slipped, revealing the raw emotion underneath. "I'm not good at this part," he admitted, his voice hoarse. "The leaving part. Usually, it's just a job. I pack, I go, I work, I come back. I don't leave anything behind that can't be put in a storage unit." He looked down at her. "This time is different." "I'm scared," Clara confessed, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "Not of Vance. That's over. I'm scared of this." She gestured to the space between them. "I'm scared that I'm a liability. Cal, look at me. I come with wheels, with medical issues, with baggage. You're an elite warrior who can run into burning buildings. I can't even climb a flight of stairs. You saved me, and I am so grateful. But I don't want to be the project you leave behind and forget about when the real world calls." Cal pushed himself off the railing. He didn't speak right away. He walked around to the front of her chair and did something that took Clara's breath away. He dropped to one knee, not in the way he had to fix her wheel or to pick up her papers. This was deliberate. He knelt so his eyes were exactly level with hers, eliminating the height difference, eliminating the power dynamic. He placed his large, warm hands on her knees, anchoring her. "You listen to me," he said, his intensity burning into her. "You think I saved you? Clara, look where I was when we met. I was a ghost. I was walking through life numb, waiting for the next fight because I didn't know how to live in the peace. I was adrift." He squeezed her knees gently, emphasizing his words. "You didn't just survive Vance. You fought him. You fought him with a broken body and no resources, and you won. I have seen strong men with perfectly good legs, crumble under half the pressure you faced this week. You have a warrior spirit, Clara. You are not a liability. You are an anchor. You are the reason I want to come back." He reached into his jacket pocket. "I can't give you a ring. Not yet. It's too soon, and I don't know where the Navy is sending me, but I want you to have this." He pulled out a small, heavy object. It was a pin, of gold and black metal, in the shape of an eagle clutching a trident and an anchor. It was his seal trident, the insignia he had bled for, the symbol of his identity, the thing that defined him to the world. He took her hand and pressed the cool metal into her palm, closing her fingers around it. "This is my trident," he whispered. "It's the only thing I have that really matters to me. In the teams, we don't give these away. It means you're part of the brotherhood. It means you're protected. He looked deep into her eyes, his soul laid bare. I'm leaving it with you, so I have to come back for it. And I am coming back for you. Clara looked at the pin in her hand, felt the weight of the gold, the sharp edges of the eagle's wings. Tears spilled from her eyelids, hot and fast. You damn well better come back, sailor, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Or I'll come looking for you, and I'm very fast on flat surfaces. Cal let out a choked, wet laugh. He leaned in, closing the small distance between them. I promise, he breathed against her lips. And then he kissed her. It wasn't the rushed, desperate kiss of a movie ending. It was slow and deep and so tender it was devastating. It tasted of salt air and coffee and the promise of a future that was fragile but real. His hands moved to cup her cheeks, his thumb stroking away a tear, while her fingers tangled in the short hair at the nape of his neck, pulling him closer. Around them, the sun finally slipped below the horizon, turning the world to twilight. The waves kept crashing, indifferent to the humans on the shore. But for Cal and Clara, the world had shrunk to this single point of contact. The fear of tomorrow was still there. The uncertainty of the deployment hung like a storm cloud. But in this moment, they were solid. They were a team. And as they pulled apart, resting their foreheads together in the gathering dark, Clara clutched the trident in her hand like a talisman, knowing that no matter how many miles of ocean separated them, the tether was now secure. The pre-dawn fog rolled in off the gulf, a thick gray blanket that muted the world and turned the streetlights into hazy amber islands. It was 0550 hours, the time of day that belongs to bakers, delivery drivers, and soldiers. For Clara Hayes, it was the time of day that signaled the end of a chapter. She sat in her living room, fully dressed despite the hour, her hands wrapped around a long cold mug of coffee. The apartment was silent, save for the steady breathing of a large dog lying at her feet. Thor. The door to her apartment opened softly, and Cal Smith stepped inside. He was no longer in the casual jeans of their beach walk, nor the impressive dress uniform of the gala. He wore his working uniform, the camouflage fatigues that seemed to blend with the shadows, heavy tan boots, and a tactical bag slung over one shoulder. The transformation was complete. The man who cooked her eggs and fixed her chair was gone, replaced by the soldier who was about to disappear into the world's blind spots. He looked tired, his eyes etched with the stoic resignation of a man who had done this too many times. But when he saw her, his expression softened. It's time, he said, his voice low in the quiet room. The two words hung in the air, heavy and absolute. Clara rolled over to him. She didn't cry. She had promised herself she wouldn't make this any harder than it already was. She reached up and adjusted the collar of his uniform, her fingers lingering on the fabric. You got everything? She asked, a mundane question to cover the terrifying bigness of the moment. Gear? Comms? Lucky socks? Cal managed a small, tired smile. Check, and check. He looked down at Thor, who had padded over and was now leaning his full weight against Cal's leg, whining softly. The dog knew. They always knew. Cal knelt, buried his face in the dog's thick ruff for a long moment, whispering something Clara couldn't hear. Then he stood and unclipped the leash from his belt, offering the leather loop to Clara. I talked to Deb, Cal said, his voice thick. We changed the plan. Thor's not going to the kennels. Clara looked at the leash in her hand, then at Cal, confusion mixing with gratitude. But he's your dog, Cal. He's your partner. Are you sure? He was my partner, Cal corrected gently. But he's retired now, and so am I, in a way. The part of me that needed him, that part is healing because of you. He put his hand over hers on the leash, sealing the transfer. He chose you, Clara. From that first night at the food truck, he was watching you, not me. He's my other half, the best part of my soul. I'm leaving him with you because I need to know you're both safe. He'll protect you better than any alarm system. He paused, looking deep into her eyes. And if he's here, it means I have to come back. I can't leave my boy behind. It was the ultimate gesture of trust. For a handler to leave his dog was like a knight leaving his sword. It was a promise made in flesh and bone. I'll take care of him, Clara swore, her voice fierce. We'll take care of each other. Cal nodded, satisfied. He leaned down, gave her one last kiss, a short, hard press of his lips that tasted of goodbye, and then grabbed his bag. Keep moving forward, Clara. Don't stop for anyone. He turned and walked out the door without looking back. The sound of his truck's engine fading into the morning fog was the loneliest sound Clara had ever heard. 6 months passed. They were months measured not in hours, but in milestones. With Vance's monopoly broken, the Houston design market had opened up like a spring flower. Clara didn't just rebuild her freelance business. She expanded it. She leased a bright, airy studio space in the Arts District, a converted warehouse with high ceilings and a ramp she had designed herself. The sign on the door read, Hayes Creative, Full Spectrum Design Solutions. She hired an assistant, Alex, a non-binary design student with neon blue hair and an infectious energy who treated Clara not as a disabled boss, but as a visionary mentor. Alex was organized, brilliant with typography, and terrified of Thor until the day the German Shepherd shared its favorite squeaky toy with them. The Vance scandal had faded from the headlines, replaced by other news. But Clara's reputation had been cemented in its own right. She was the woman who had stood up to a giant. Clients came to her not out of pity, but out of respect. She was busy, exhausted, and fulfilled. But the silence in the apartment at night was still loud. Communication with Cal was sporadic. Going dark meant exactly that. There were weeks of silence, punctuated by brief, encrypted emails that arrived at odd hours. Safe. It's hot here. Thinking of the Gulf. Thinking of you. Or, saw a stray dog today. Reminded me of Thor. Hope he's not getting fat. Miss you. Clara printed every one of them, keeping them in a box on her nightstand next to the gold trident pin. She lived her life in 2 time zones, her own, and the unknown one where Cal was operating. It was a late spring Tuesday afternoon. The Texas sun was brilliant, turning the Houston Ship Channel into a sheet of hammered silver. Clara was in her studio reviewing the final proofs for a citywide outreach campaign she had designed. Thor was lying under her desk, his favorite spot, acting as a very effective foot warmer. Hey, boss, Alex called from the front desk, peering over a stack of fabric swatches. The courier just dropped the proofs for the Maritime Museum and you've been staring at that same pixel for 20 minutes. Take a break. Go get some air. Clara blinked, realizing Alex was right. Her eyes were burning. You're awfully bossy for an intern, Clara teased, stretching. Design assistant, Alex corrected with a grin. And I'm only bossy because I care. Go. Thor needs a potty break anyway. Clara whistled and Thor scrambled to his feet, his tail thumping against the leg of the desk. They went out the back door, which opened onto a wide boardwalk overlooking the shipping channel. The air was fresh and salty. Clara rolled to the edge of the pier and locked her brakes. She watched the water, the way the sun danced on the waves. In the distance, a gray haze on the horizon marked the silhouette of a Navy destroyer returning to port. It was a common sight in this part of Texas, but every time she saw one, her heart gave a traitorous leap. She reached down, scratching Thor's ears. The dog was also staring at the horizon, his nose twitching, testing the wind. He let out a sharp bark, his tail beginning to wag, slowly at first, then faster. What is it, boy? Clara asked softly. Is it just a boat? Just another boat? But her heart was hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She pulled her phone from her pocket, checking it for the 100th time that day. Usually there was nothing, just a notification from Slack or Instagram. But today, the screen lit up the moment she touched it. A new message. The sender ID was blocked, just a random string of numbers. But she knew. She knew. Her fingers were shaking so badly she almost dropped the device. She swiped the notification open. The message was short. No flowery language, no poetry, just the tactical precision of a man who dealt in facts. Wheels down at NAS Corpus Christi. ETR 20 mics. Wait for me. I'm coming home. Clara stared at the words, the letters blurring as tears finally filled her eyes. She was not the broken girl in the restaurant lobby. She was a business owner, a community leader, a survivor. She sat in her chair, the gold trident pinned to the inside of her blazer over her heart, and looked at the gray ship growing larger on the horizon. A smile bloomed on her face, radiant and unstoppable. She looked down at Thor, who was now dancing on his feet, whining with a joy that matched her own. You hear that, buddy? She whispered, grabbing a handful of the fur around his neck. He's coming home. She turned her chair around, not to go back to work, but to head for the parking lot. She had a soldier to meet. The war was over. The peace was just beginning. And for the first time in her life, Clara Hayes knew exactly where she was going.